Hello and very welcome to my March reading wrap-up. I have set up a nice journal spread, as I always do, and I've gotten through quite a few books. So I finished 6 and 1 magazine. As usual, I have chapters or timestamps below for you if you want to skip ahead or to any specific book. So let's not waste any more time and get started with the first book right away. The first book that I started March with turned out to be the best pick that I could have had for my spring reading challenge. Because in The Water Lilies of Mishipeshu by Karla there are a lot of natural themes, and one of the main elements of the story is a water lily that is very special to this specific region and has specific powers as well. So that was pretty much the best start that I could have had thematically for my challenge reading. And of course I picked this book because of the water in the title, but I actually picked it up as an early reviewer's copy through Library Thing, and therefore got to read it really early on, as this is a really recent release. The book itself is a historical fiction book with a mythical element that reads a little bit like a collection of connected short stories. I really enjoyed the way it was set up and how descriptive it was, not only in terms of the lives of the people that it described, but also in terms of the natural setting and the surroundings and the area that it described. So because I really enjoyed it so much, I gave it 4.5 stars. And for me, it was the interesting writing style with different chapters that always play in different times. So you constantly switch between perspectives. Each chapter is in a different time, and sometimes you will jump ahead just like 10 years, and sometimes you jump ahead more around 50 years. And each time you follow somebody that had to do something with one specific botanical manuscript. And basically what happens is that in this area of the United States that would now be Indiana, there are still, at the beginning of the book, the Native Americans living there. And the first missionaries are coming in and trying to convert them to Christianity. And we basically follow the descendants of these natives that we saw in the first story. And one of them is like herb woman and explains the use of different plants and where to find them to her love interest, probably, who is actually a white man that came in with the colonizers. But at this point in time, there's not that many people coming in, and basically they only have a little fort and trading post on the river that all of this takes place along. And as this man is really interested in botany and likes to look at the plants and draw them, he creates the manuscript that then ends up going through the ages as this sort of memory of how plants were used in the native ways and what you can do with them. And the one thing that always comes up is this special water lily that blooms in red and only at night. And you can harvest it and you can create a lovely medicine from it that will give you hallucinations. And pretty much everyone that takes it sees visions of Mishipeshu, who is the goddess of the river in the old beliefs of the natives. And so while we follow the humans go through the centuries, we always get like little interludes of Mishipeshu, for whom the whole thing is more like a day. And she is actually on her own quest and doing her own things as well. So that was a really cool little mythical element, while still focusing mostly on the development of the area and the different historical times. Well, as I said, I really enjoyed this read, and if it sounds interesting at all, you should give it a try. In terms of my goals, this one counts as another read book, but I can't put it down as a physical read because I only have it as an ebook. So it also goes onto my shelf in the color of an ebook, but over here on my new books as I got it this year. And so I read it really quickly and of course reviewed it. For the bingo pages, this one is a really great find because I can put it in as a new release, which I don't read that many of. And in terms of the themes, I can also find a really good place for it because, as I said, there were a lot of natural descriptions and a lot of wild animals that tended to reoccur. So I'm just gonna go with the whole suite of wild animals as containing any wild animal. Of course, I couldn't let this chance pass by to add another animal to my collection, so I put down this lovely red-tailed hawk that came up in at least 4 or 5 of the different storylines and was seen by people that we were following throughout the book, so it just made sense for me to put it in here as well. And finally, let me put down Karla Cruz as a C, while I unfortunately cannot put down the title anywhere because I already have filled out all the spaces where it would fit. And of course, the Water Lilies of Mishipeshu were also the first book that I can count towards my spring reading challenge. As it has water in the title and on the cover, I can put it down for that prompt and fill up my little watering can down here in the corner so that I will be set up to get lots of plants from everything on the right side of this page. And that's it for this book, so let's continue on to the next one. And that was something completely different, because the next book that I finished was Algorithms of Oppression by Safiya Umoja Noble, which is a non-fiction from the area of computer science and social sciences, and something that I picked up to further my knowledge of biases in AI, because I really want to be conscious about how we use AI and where we use it as I work with those types of technologies. So to get started with this type of research, I figured I would pick up a few books, and the first one that I wanted to read was this one because it's a few years old at this point and it describes the history of bias and search engines quite well, so that felt like a good starting point to get me going. As I will definitely be doing more on this topic, there will be a separate video on how I did this research and how I did the annotation of this book. And if that video is already up, I'm not quite sure at the point of filming this, then I will definitely link you to it as well. I do have to say that this book was quite a difficult read, and I haven't read anything this deeply scientific in quite a while, I think. But the topic was fascinating, or maybe I should say horrifying, and I really learned a lot from reading it. It is crazy to hear how much inherent racism still exists, especially in the US, where there are a lot less regulations than here in the European Union. And racism is just something that I tend to not see as much of, because obviously as a white woman, I'm not affected by it as such. But it did feel vaguely similar to all the sexism that I do experience, at least every now and again, in my professional environment. And I mean, I don't know if there's any woman out there working in tech and actually on the technological side of IT that hasn't heard the words that, oh, this is too logical for you, or something like that. So I do know where that comes from. I do know how it feels in at least some extent. And I realized that a lot of what the author found about search engines in this book is likely very true for modern AI tools and chatbots as well. And at least all that is about the data that is used as a basis for all of this is definitely the same issue occurring over and over again. And this topic in general is something that I will be diving deeper into over the coming weeks. So I won't go into that much detail here. But if you're interested, do look out for those videos to come and consider subscribing so you won't miss them. Anyways, for this book, as I was annotating it, I noted down a lot of the information and my thoughts in my commonplace book already, which you can already see me pull out here. And I do have two favorite quotes that I want to note down as well, because they just kind of stuck with me. The first one is, while we often think of terms such as big data and algorithms as being benign, neutral, or objective, they are anything but. And that is quite a true statement, because we tend to not really think about it too much and just consider mathematical or logical algorithms to be obviously objective, which they tend to not be, because people programmed them and the data that they are based on are also what you give them and not just everything that exists or anything that is specifically objective. And the second quote that I found quite interesting as well from her was, many people say to me, but tech companies don't mean to be racist. Intent is not particularly important. Outcomes and results are important. And with that, I'll just say that if you do want to really deep dive on data and algorithm bias in online searches, then this book is definitely something that will help you with that. But if you're not that much into scientific reading, then this is probably not the book that I would recommend you start with. And I will have more books on this issue and these topics coming up in just a minute. So let's continue. In terms of my goals, this book counts as another read book, as well as my read and annotate book for the first quarter, which means I can tick it off down here as well. Heading on over to the bookshelves, I will have to write it in the annotated shelf, and this time I actually get to color it in twice, because I want to have it on my annotation shelf as well as on my new bookshelf, because I did buy it just a few weeks ago, and thus I have to fill it out here as well. In terms of the bingos, it only fits in the first one as it is a nonfiction, and that's where it goes in. And it doesn't fit into any themes, because that's not the kind of themes that I was looking for. Nonetheless, with this book, we can fill up my quarterly goals spread, so I can put it in here and decorate the cover a little bit, which means that I'm done with the quarter one goals for this year and doing fine so far. And finally, I can of course use it for the alphabet spread as well, and I will take down the author under U, while the algorithms of oppression can fit into the space for O. And that's it for now, so let's head on to the next book. I also read another book about the topic of AI and biases in AI in this month, and that was Unmasking AI by Dr. Joy Buolamwini. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I thought that this was a great book and an amazing introduction to the topic, because it was written more as a mixture of a memoir and a scientific explanation, and that made it so much easier to read. So even if you don't have a background in computer science, you will still be able to read it just fine. And it tells a really empowering story of the author who was faced with biases in technology herself and had to struggle through that, and then decided to study them and tell the world about it, which I think was just a very great choice. So overall, I can really recommend this book for anybody that is interested in biases in AI and learning how it works and where they come from. And it definitely helped me put a lot of my ideas into more context as well. And it did further my understanding on the different types of biases and some of the points that I might need to consider as well that I haven't encountered so far directly myself. So in terms of the story, our university student Joy first came across this issue when she tried to use facial recognition in a system she was creating, and it just didn't work for her at all. And she is obviously a darker skinned woman, as you can tell from the cover, and she had a white mask lying around, so she just basically tried to use that one, and well, with the mask, her face was discovered and she could have it tracked. So this was the first point that made her think about the concept of having biases against certain types of people in technology, especially in AI. And later on, she actually picked the same concept as her research idea and then finally published results that led to quite a lot of international companies retraining their computer vision models and thinking more about this topic. So I found it really crazy to hear how much the skin color adds to the disadvantages that women already have in technology. And there were a lot of great pieces of advice in this book that I do want to take to heart, especially about speaking up when you have a chance to do so. And I can't really speak much about people of color, of course, but even as a white woman, it often feels like I am in a precarious position and I don't want to challenge the more powerful people around me that are usually white men, because I do worry about the consequences. But in the end, I feel like Joy is right. There won't be any change in the world if we don't do something about it and something towards making this change happen ourselves. So in the end, I found it to be a really inspiring book, and while it is still absolutely a non-fiction book, of course, and has quite a few good sources to look into as well, it did feel a bit more like a 5-star read, and it was just a really cool story to follow along with. So it was really well written for me, and I found it very captivating. And as I said, if this topic sounds interesting to you at all, and if you're a woman that maybe worries about AI and its biases, or if you're a person of color that worries about that, I think that this book would be a great place to get started on being more informed about the topic. So yeah, huge recommendation from my side, and I'm glad I read it this month. And in terms of my spread, I maybe should have said that earlier. I decided to do a whole 2 pages because I didn't just want to write down what I thought about the book, but also wanted to put down a few points of good advice that she had for people like me, and also put down a few of the challenges that she was talking about because they just resonated with me, and I really feel like it makes sense for me to come back to them and maybe look especially at the advice from time to time. So that's what I've been doing here, and that's why my second page looks a bit different than my normal reading journal entry. But yeah, with that said, I think we can go ahead and put that book into my trackers as well. First off, the book of course counts as one of the 60 books that I want to read and is number 15, so I'm going on quite well over here. And it also is a physically owned book, as you can see, so I'm going to tick it off down in the bottom as well, and thus have my monthly goal fulfilled for that. But let's move on right away and over to the bookshelf. As I also bought this book recently, it is on my new books shelf, and I'm gonna fill it in here with the color for physically owned books, which is a nice and dark green. And I do have to say that I really like the fact that I've already read so many of my new books since getting them in this year, which hasn't been that long, to be honest. But moving on, this book doesn't fit into the bingos because the non-fiction square is already taken, and obviously it doesn't have one of the fiction themes that I've been looking for. So we can move on straight to my monthly goals, where it fits in as a physically read book for this month. Let me just put in the cover over here, and then we have that one set. And finally, I can also use it for my alphabet challenge. So I'm gonna start with the title this time and put it in under U for Unmasking AI before going ahead and putting down the author under B as well. And with that, we're done for this book, and we can move on to more nice, easy fiction for the rest of the month. The next book that I read this month was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. And similar to The Water Lilies of Mishipeshu, this is also a historical book, but it plays not quite as much in the real world, but more in the world of Greek mythology. And it is a retelling of the story of Ariadne and her sister in ancient Greece. As such, I chose to use some of my lovely washi tapes with fitting images to make up this spread. And I also wanted to stay true to the sun theme that I picked this book for. So I'm going with yellowish and orange colors for this entry. I really enjoyed the book in that it was an incredibly real story with flawed characters and a mixture of joyful and sad events. And the two sisters basically had to struggle to make the most of their lives. So we follow two girls, and we start out with only following Ariadne, but after a while we also follow her sister Phaedra, who has her own story to tell. And basically the two girls are the daughters of King Minos of Crete. And he has the Minotaur in the labyrinth beneath their castle. And this Minotaur was born as their brother and basically ruined their connection to their mother as well. So they didn't have the greatest childhood. And their father also wasn't a nice person and he didn't really do much with them. So they start out not having the best life. And then, as the king has already taken over Athens and they have to send sacrifices every year to be given to the Minotaur and killed. And when these people arrive as sacrifices, with the inclusion of Prince Theseus from Athens, everything starts to change. Basically, both Ariadne and her sister are blinded by his heroism and how he holds himself and how he tells stories, and they decide to help him and make sure that he can actually defeat the Minotaur and survive. And at this point I cannot tell you much more, because if I would spoil the first interesting part of the book basically. But overall I really liked the setting and how well described it was, and I found it quite fun to read. And I mean, it's Greek mythology, so gods are real, they interact with the world, and there are lots of legends being told by different people that were either part of the legends or just heard of them, and it just gives you this mythological feel, and that was really a nice setting to read. I also enjoyed that the book overall shows the female perspective of how the men and gods in this society basically have been using the women, and how these women had to somehow accept what was being done to them, but also find their own way and struggle through it to make the best of it and create their own life for themselves. So I think it was a great read for this month for sure, and I really enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. If you're interested in this type of mythology and you don't mind reading sometimes a bit slower historical fiction, I think this would be a great read for you as well. With that said, let's go through our overview pages and tick off this book where it belongs. Of course, this is another read book, and that makes 16 books read for this year already. And moving on to my bookshelves, I will put it in as the first unowned book that I read this month, which feels like it's quite late to have the first unowned book, but I'm also really proud about reading more of my own books, so I'm not gonna complain, to be honest. Anyway, with that put in there, we can move on to the book bingos, and while I don't have a good spot for it in the first one, it definitely fits really well into the theme of a mythic world, because as I just said, we're in the Greek mythology. So let's put it in there before we move on further. And the other place that we can use this book for is the alphabet, but only for the author, as Ariadne doesn't fit in the titles because A is already taken. So we're gonna put down Jennifer Saint as J and have another nice entry in here. And finally, as there is a nice beautiful sun on the cover, we can also put it down for my spring reading challenge for the sun prompt, which will make sure that if I collect one of the 3 plants on the left side, I can also collect the full amount of flowers from them. So let me get the sun in here, and then we're done with this book and can head on to the next. And then there was some time between that book and the next book that I finished, because I ended up reading a very long book and also parallelly listening to an audiobook. So let's start with the audiobook that I finished just on the last few days of the month, which was Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson, which is the second book in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. And last year I read the first book and I enjoyed it as a simple, nice little mystery. So I tend to read those every now and then when I feel like it. And this time, when I was looking through the available audiobooks from the library, I saw that the second book in the series was available, and I figured that would be a nice thing to do on the side, because I tend to not have too many books going on at the same time, as that always feels like I might get things mixed up. But I knew for sure that I wouldn't get anything mixed up between this audiobook and the book that I will tell you about afterwards, and you will understand why, I'm sure. So yeah, I did listen to this as an audiobook, which was great because it was really interesting with the podcast being portrayed in it, as the audiobook had the podcast acted out with different voices and all the interviews and voice notes were really audible there, and that was really cool. And I enjoyed this style as it kept me engaged in listening. So in terms of the story, the main character Pip that we know from the first book was starting to struggle a bit with being a good girl this time, as she did get drawn back into detective work, even though she really said that she wouldn't do that again, and she tried not to do it again. But when one of her friends came to her because his brother went missing and he wanted her help to go and search for him, she basically decided that that was more important and that she would definitely help him with his problem. And this time, as she has set up a podcast and talked about the storyline of the first book, she also had to deal with the internet and all the kinds of comments that she gets on her podcast and her new episodes for this new mystery as well. And that didn't help her in terms of the perceptions in school along the way. So it wasn't that easy for her, but overall I think she did quite well in the end. It was a nice story, but for myself I didn't quite connect with the characters as much as I did in the first book. But that's maybe also because I'm getting a bit old for this type of story, I think, but that's fine. Nevertheless, the mystery was well done and it had a lot of modern elements, which I liked. So I will still put it at 3.5 stars, which is basically good, but not great. And so I'd say if you're in the mood for a YA mystery and you like the idea of having some mixed media, I can definitely recommend this series, even though it's not something that I would reread, and it's also not a series that I actively would be reading, as in that I would be tracking if I continue it or not. If I'm in the mood, I might pick one more up. If I'm not, then probably not. As for my goal pages, this book obviously counts as one more book read, so let's tick that off before heading straight on to the bookshelves, where it goes on the unowned shelf as my one audiobook for this month, so in a lighter green. And with that said, we can also go ahead and look at the book bingos, where it fit in really nicely as the mixed media book that I was talking about, even though I decided to not add it on the themes bingo. And with that said, we can move on all the way to the author alphabet, where we can put down Holly Jackson for H, and of course the title Good Girl, Bad Blood for B. And that's it done for this book. The book that I finished right after this and that I was reading alongside it is The Strength of the Few by James Islington. And this is part 2 of the Hierarchy series that I have been waiting for quite a while. Probably you've already heard of it. So part 1 is The Will of the Many. And I read that last year and really enjoyed the storyline and how it was written. So as the ending was really unexpected and opened up a lot of possibility, it did make me want to read on immediately. But of course, I tend to not always buy new books just because of that. And my library got the book right away. So I put myself on the waiting list, which took a few months. And here we are now. And I was able to read it. But let me start off right away with a spoiler warning. So I won't be talking any spoilers, but my notes in the journal this time will definitely contain spoilers of the first book, as it's pretty much not possible to write a real review on this book if you don't spoil the ending of book 1. So if you don't want to be spoiled, do not read anything I will be writing on here. Anyways, I was really happy to finally be able to continue the story because I was really interested to see where it would take us. And this second book starts right where we left off, and this time there are multiple storylines branching off, which is done in a very unique way, and it makes the beginning of the book really intense to read, at least I thought so. So that even after 100 pages, I didn't quite feel like I knew what was going on yet, but in the best way possible. And I cannot say much about the story without spoiling it, so I won't go into details, but the world building got on another level, and I've really enjoyed getting to know these very different places that the different storylines take place in. And I also felt like there was quite a lot of character building for our main character, Viz. And we learned so much more about how the magic, the will, is used and can be used, while also following the political tensions rising. And not everyone that we met in the first book will survive the second one. So it was quite a tense story sometimes, but it was really interesting and I loved reading it, although it was really, really long. So all in all, I absolutely enjoyed it, and at some points it was close to getting 5 stars, but the beginning was throwing in quite a lot of new pieces and people, and I found it sometimes a bit difficult to follow all the different storylines, and some of the later parts were a bit hard to read in terms of the decision making going on. So that's why it didn't quite get the 5 stars, but I'm gonna go and stick to 4.5 because it was amazing. And on a side note, just in case that you do not know this book and you do not know the series, the first book, The Will of the Many, is basically a fantasy book in a Roman-themed setting in which an orphan, Viz, is sent to an academy to fight for one of the high positions in the system. And the thing that is really cool about it is the magic system, as it is quite different and really interesting, being based on a clear hierarchy of people that work for each other and favoring a powerful elite. So it's a bit dystopian sometimes, but it has quite a big fantasy element overall. So yeah, this was a great read with over 700 pages, and let's put it towards my goals as well. Of course, it gets another tick as one of my read books, and I'm making progress there really nicely. And it does also go onto my unowned bookshelf, which is great because that's all the spaces filled that I was prepping for this month. And when we head on to my bingo pages, there are some great places for it to fill too. I have left open a few of the easy spots on the first bingo card, so we're gonna put this down as the fantasy book because that definitely fits. And it also goes down into the themes as containing a fantasy animal. The animal that I'm referring to in this case is an alupi, which is a different type of wolf that Viz gets to interact with quite a lot. And I have painted it as well for my animal collection. which we will get to next. So let me just put my drawing of Diago in here, and let me say then I'm not 100% sure how to imagine this huge wolf that is quite fearsome to a lot of people, but I figured I would just go with some type of wolf and put him on here as well. And with that said, we can of course also look at the alphabet challenges, in which James Islington will go down as I, and the strength of the few still fits in F as well. So that finally we can get to my series tracker and put down the little tick for the second book in the hierarchy, which means that I am now alongside quite a lot of people waiting for the last book to come out. And finally, this book also counts for my spring reading challenge for the Valerian, which requires a book with more than 400 pages, and I think this one will definitely fit in fine here. So let me add this flower to the page, and then we're done with this book. And that is it in terms of books that I read, but of course you might have noticed that I still need to read my monthly magazine as well, at least if you've seen my last videos. So I figured I would try and get that done on the last day of the month as well, which worked out really well because I have another lovely short little nature magazine that I've been meaning to read. And as I was traveling around quite a lot in March and going into the city to work and to do events and stuff, I figured why not just take it along for a day and just read in the train, in the buses, and wherever I could. And with that, I actually managed to go through the whole magazine in one day because it always has quite a lot of nice little stories and little articles, and that's quite easy to read if you don't have that much time. This time the main focus was on conserving big areas of nature in Eastern Africa and creating a huge area of interconnected land that the animals can move through and not bother humans and not be bothered by humans. So that was quite nice because of course that is something that interests me as well. But with that said, I can tick off one more read piece of media and also finally tick off the magazine for March, which means that all my goals for March and my goals for the first quarter are done, which is great because I'm doing just fine there. And then of course I can color in one more magazine slot for this magazine as well, which gives me a nice colorful stairway here of magazines that I've read this year. And finally, I can also put it in the monthly goals page, which again shows really nicely how much I've already gotten done this year, and I'm quite happy that so far I'm getting through my goals really well. But yeah, that's all of the things that I read in March. So let us finish off this video with having a quick look at all the books that I read in March, which were quite a few. And as you can see in the calendar, I was reading all the time basically. I also made quite a bit of progress in my reading challenge, which is nice to see, and obviously I still plan on finishing that. And as we look through all the books that I read this month, you can see that there were quite a few interesting ones in there, and it was a really good reading month. So I'm really happy that you were here to follow along with me, and I hope to see you again sometime soon when I talk about books once more. And I can tell you, April is already looking great. I've picked my TBR. I'm not sure if I can manage to read all of those, but I'm really gonna go for it. So I'll link the video right here if you want to check it out. And I hope you have the best of time, and thank you for watching. Bye!